a song for ya.
You're listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I will do one episode for each song the band recorded in the studio. However, this is a fan podcast and not band endorsed. It's more of a tribute to their long history, well beyond just the hits, and my way of giving something back to a band that has given so much to me. Let's dig in! Hello and welcome to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, here with our second song review. And already I've got a fantastic guest. The only concern I have, and I mentioned this yesterday, is that I record these about a month ahead. And I'm afraid that my guest today, who is a master of podcasts, will come up with 3 more shows and release them before this actually comes out. Let's get him on the show, Corey Morrissette. Corey, how are you?
I just came up with a new one, Master of Podcasts.
There you go.
January 2025, right before this comes out.
That's right. Well, this one will air February 2nd, or February 4th, I'm sorry. And I'm really excited. I'm excited that you're my first guest on the show because you are, I mean, I look at everything you've accomplished in podcasting and that you continue to grow the CMPU. And I'm like, man, you have a family, you have a full-time job, you've got all this stuff going on, and yet you still maintain all these podcasts.
Well, it's easy when you don't like your family or your job. You tend to devote more time towards the podcast. So
that's certainly fair enough. I need to get some advice from you because I just received a notification, my first time living back east in the wintertime, and you live in the northern part of North America where you barely see the sun. And this is a freeze warning that we need to keep the cabinet doors open, that our faucets need to stay on slow drip, which I don't even know how you do. What advice do you have for me so that I don't end up like Jack Torrance in The Shining?
Move. Just move back to Las Vegas. It's nice and warm. You don't got to worry about any of that stuff. We're talking about temperatures before. And currently where I live, it's minus 14 degrees Fahrenheit, which is minus 28 degrees Celsius. Not counting the wind chill. It's well into the minus 30s. With the wind chills. So because we're recording this kind of over New Year's break, I hadn't left the house in a few days, but I had to leave today to get some medication, and holy cow, that minus 28, it's not fun. So I recommend moving. I wish I was in Las Vegas right now.
Yeah, I wish we were. We would hang out. We would have a good time. We would go see a concert or a Cirque du Soleil show. It'd be a lot of fun.
Absolutely, yeah.
But Corey, I want to ask you, because you have not covered any Deep Purple songs on your show, and I know that you're not hugely familiar with them, but what is your Deep Purple experience so far?
I thought we were talking about Milli Vanilli, because they did a version of the song Hush on their debut record.
You didn't.
Is this not the Milli Vanilli cast?
You didn't put version in quote, which I think would have been fitting.
I know, a Deep Purple, kind of a greatest hits guy. Like that's one band I always kind of wanted to get more into because from what I've heard, I've really loved, obviously, when you're talking about the big hits like Burn or Hush or Smoke on the Water and all that kind of stuff. So when you, and I do listen to the Deep Purple podcast, but they've kind of moved on. I kind of listen to the more newer stuff, special stuff, live stuff, the stuff you're on, that kind of thing. But when you said you were going to start doing a deep dive, I'm like, well, at least I can kind of jump on board right with you, episode 1, and kind of go through the Deep Purple catalog. And then I can cherry pick with Deep Purple podcast and get their thoughts kind of on the same song. So when I found out you were doing this show, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to kind of put aside the deep dive I was planning on doing on Deep Purple with the other shows and stuff, and just kind of wait for you to start yours. Because I enjoyed going through Uriah Heep, which is another band I knew nothing about. I wouldn't even say I was a greatest hits fan of Uriah Heep when I started that. But, I'd listen to you when you were putting out the new shows, and I'd go back and I'd cherry pick the old stuff. That kind of intrigued me, and I thought, well, it's a really kind of cool way to go through a catalog. So I'm looking forward to starting show 1, song 1, from album 1, and going all the way through to how many records? What, 24 or 25?
24, yeah. And then by the time that I am done with the show, or well before, they should have another record out. They're actually working on it now, Roger said. So really excited about that. It is interesting that the way that the Deep Purple podcast does it, they do it by album. So I'm going in, but they do their album in 1 or 2 episodes. And so I'm doing an album at a time, but 1 episode per song. So once I finish that season or that album, then you can go back and listen to the Deep Purple podcast doing that album and
Right.
just see, kind of how we compare in thoughts and all that. It is interesting. I've really enjoyed that show, and I talked to them before I started this podcast. I'm like, "Are you guys okay with this? I don't want you to feel like I'm stepping on your toes." And they said, "Go to hell." So I started the podcast.
Well, good on you. Screw those guys.
That's right. No, they're great friends, and it's funny because on their New Year's episode they kind of teased, and John was a little bit of a curmudgeon about me starting the show, but we've talked about it well ahead of time, so I enjoyed that little segment. Nate said that they hope they get to come on the show, and well, yeah, of course. So it'll be fun. It's interesting too because Roger had mentioned that in North America he really feels like they're a legacy band, and I think to some extent that probably is true. They do have a lot of fans here, but I think just the general public is much like you, Highway Star, Burn, Perfect Strangers, that kind of thing. And I'm hoping to do what I did with Uriah Heep, which is really take people like you who are curious about the band and who want to know more, or maybe just have heard of them and said, "Oh, I wonder what they're like," and kind of expand their horizons with the show and give you a reason to check out all the songs.
I can't wait. And I can't wait to start my own Deep Purple podcast where I'm going to cover every album, Ultimate Catalog Clash style. So I'm sure Nate and John at the Deep Purple podcast will love that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll get my curmudgeon voice on when I introduce that show. Before we get into today's song, I want to let people know that you have a lot of shows out. You have And the Podcast Will Rock, where you covered the entire Van Halen catalog, and you have moved on to the solo albums. And your wheel style podcast Song Choice has moved on to many other shows in our Deep Dive Podcast Network. And you also have the Ultimate Catalog Clash, where you pick a band and you kind of go through that certain period or catalog section of theirs, or the entire catalog if they only have a few albums out. And the Podcast Will Rock is with Mark Kmeyer. Ultimate Catalog Clash, of course, with Kevin Brown. And your new show that I'm really excited about that is just getting started as this airs. It'll already have started. And it is called the... Oh, crap.
Power of Positive Geeking.
I had it earlier and the name just escaped me. This is why I should write things down.
Power of Positive Geeking. Scott, you should know that. You were on that show already.
Yes, and I binged the entire first season. You uploaded the original format of the show, and I was on the first episode talking about Big Trouble in Little China. This is such a fun show. What I really love about you, and I'm looking forward to getting your thoughts on this song, is because you're you are very positive. If there's something that you don't like, you will call it out and you will state your opinion. But I don't really feel like you very often just bash anything that you don't like for no reason. Like there has to be a pretty extreme reason, like Pound Cake or something, where you're like, okay, I just hate this song.
Except I love that song. But yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah. Which was the one that you didn't want? Every week you were like, don't draw the song. And then you finally had to do it. Spanked. That's it.
And even that one, musically, it's a lot better than it is lyrically.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the whole thing that I'm really not a fan of. But musically, I could pick out little moments that I like. I'm like, okay, this is interesting what he did there and stuff. I had some Genesis tunes that I wasn't a very big fan of when I did the Genesis Phil Collins season of Ultimate Catalog Clash. Songs like Who Done It. I think I may have gave a 1-1-1 because there just wasn't much there to enjoy. But I do try and give everything a fair shake, and I do try to talk about everything positively because, artists are artists, and they deserve that kind of respect. And yeah, there's things that aren't going to hit you the right way, but that's fine. It's going to hit somebody else, and that's great. So if I hate a song and you love a song, that's fantastic. I love Thunder, you hate Thunder, that's great. It just means I'm more right than you are, and that's okay.
And I really do want to revisit that album at some point when I can get away from my memories of that episode of the Haskincast podcast where we reviewed a Thunder album. But that's, I think, what I love about you and I doing shows together is that you and I have very different musical tastes, but also our tastes do have that sort of part where they converge. Like we have our diagram where you have your circle, I have my circle, but there's that middle section where we both enjoy certain things. You like your music a little more straightforward. I like my music a little bit more progressive. But there's some stuff in the middle that we just love.
Absolutely. And that Venn diagram is actually fairly big, I think. I think the stuff that on your outliers and my outliers, we're still, we're opposite on, but not as bad as like, say, Kevin Brown and I, as we just recorded the Pyromania episodes of the Ultimate Catalog Clash, and that is the farthest we have been apart on a record yet by far.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to hearing that as we record this. That'll come out next week. I was kind of concerned about that because Kevin was very, very vocal about how much he disliked Def Leppard, and I'm anxious to see how well he was able to give it a fair shake and kind of put all that to the side and listen to the record. So we'll see. As of course, as this airs, that will already have aired. We won't quite be close to the end of the season, but I'm definitely excited about this season because it has a big variety. Whereas, I wasn't a huge fan of Dire Straits, definitely not a fan of Foo Fighters. So last couple seasons were a little more rough for me. But I always enjoy the banter back and forth, the way that you guys dissect the music and, what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy and why.
That's why 1983 is turning out to be a really fun year. Pyromania aside, we talked about Sweet Dreams. Mm-hmm. We have Quiet Riot, Metal Health coming up, Huey Lewis and the News, Sports, Kiss, Lick It Up, Motley Crue, Shout Out the Devil, Culture Clubs, Color by Numbers, Cyndi Lauper, She's So Unusual, Billy Idol's Rebel Yell, and Slade's The Amazing Kamikaze Syndrome, which is a deep cut for me because I got to pick the year, and that's one of my favorite records.
Yeah, I think the only way you could have had any more variety is if you'd put a Tony Bennett album in there.
There you go. And I don't even know if he released anything in 83. I know a lot of people were like, why didn't you put Billy Joel and Innocent Man on there? That was 83, or Police, Synchronicity. And the answer to that is because I think we're doing full seasons on the Police and Billy Joel at some point. So we were just kind of I was cherry picking from bands that we're not going to do an entire season on. If I did a whole season on Def Leppard, Kevin would just quit.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it would be a tough sell to get him to do that. You were close. The season, I think, that you got the Foo Fighters, you were very close to getting the Police.
Yes, we were. Yeah, they were one of them. And really excited to talk about the Police because, again, like outside, I know Synchronicity really well and kind of the bigger hits. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the album cuts from those early albums, I'm not really familiar with. So that's what I'm going to kind of rediscover whenever we cover that catalog.
Yeah, and Stuart Copeland, if you follow Stuart Copeland on his, I think he's got a YouTube channel, but I get his stuff on Instagram. He's got an amazing channel. He talks about a lot of the songs and he replays them, tries to remember them. It's a lot of fun. And he's such an interesting guy and a great soundtrack writer. He did the soundtrack for one of my favorite shows, Dead Like Me. My friend Ellen Muth was the star of that. And every year, around Halloween time, I go back and rewatch the 2 seasons in the movie and just adore his score for that show. Yeah,
and just a top tier drummer. Like you're talking to one drummer and one wannabe drummer on this call here with you today, and Stuart Copeland is just amazing.
Well, I may be a wannabe, but I'm working hard at it.
Oh no, that's me. You're you have another album coming out, for crying out loud.
That's right. Well, it'll already be out by the time this comes out as we record. It's about 2 weeks away from release. I just approved the masters yesterday, so very relieved that's over. Now I just have all the processing and paperwork to do, and that'll go live. My photograph for it is done. Kelly did an amazing job, and then I've got my lettering should be done tomorrow by Rebecca, so I'm really excited to see that and do the cover release and get the sucker out.
That is fantastic, and to do again all Milli Vanilli covers, I thought was a brave choice.
Well,
but one that I'm behind.
It's really easy to do vocals on an instrumental album, but I did lip sync the whole thing.
I'm sitting here. I mentioned Milli Vanilli twice now. I should do a Milli Vanilli season. Because there's the record that the other guys recorded that they lip synced to. Then they tried to do it on their own. That didn't sound good at all. That'd be a great season, just those 2 records.
But bless their heart for getting in all these vocal coaches and really trying to learn how to sing. I mean, they really gave it an effort.
They really did, yeah. Too bad it didn't work out.
Maybe should have done that in the first place, but who am I to judge?
Also, their version of Hush is terrible.
I'm not surprised. I've never heard it, and I'm kind of afraid but curious at the same time. It's like that there's a monster in the closet door, but you have to open it just the same.
Well, I listened to it today just because I was kind of researching a little bit for my appearance here today. So I'm going to listen to a few of the other covers and brought up Milli Vanilli's and like, oh, that's
yeah, I don't doubt that. And I can't match their hair, so I'm just kind of stuck. Yeah.
You can match their physiques though.
That's true. If I work out a little bit and maybe get in the tanning booth, I'll be all right.
Yeah, you've just put in just a little bit of effort. I think you'd be right there.
I'm so glad this is an audio only podcast. So we're talking about Hush now. Speaking of cover songs, this is actually a cover song. The song was originally written by Joe South. The version that was going around at the time that Deep Purple knew was by a man called Billy Joe Royal, and that was the one that inspired them. There are a number of covers on this album. As I go through each song, we'll get to those. We got a little bit of Beatles coming up, one of my favorite bands. Corey, are you a big fan of the Beatles?
Love the Beatles, yeah, especially early Beatles.
Mm-hmm. See, once again, here's where we differ, because you're an early Beatles guy. I'm an Abbey Road Magical Mystery Tour guy.
And I like those albums just fine. I like Sgt. Pepper's. Mm-hmm. Let It Be, I think, is fantastic. But Rubber Soul and earlier is kind of my wheelhouse. And then you're probably Rubber Soul and later.
Exactly. Yeah, Rubber Soul is where I really pick up. I mean, I like the old, like the skiffle stuff, but I find it a little repetitive. But I will say, and I've said this many times, if you want to understand what swing drumming is in a straightforward rock song, Love Me Do, watch the video. You get to see Ringo's hi-hat hand very clearly and how he plays a swing feel. That's what Ian Pace plays. He grew up on swing and jazz, and his father was a jazz musician. He played in his father's band for a while. So he really kind of learned that same style. And while it sounds straightforward, it's slightly off of that. And I think that's one of the things that is a real signature in Deep Purple's sound. Oh,
I could not agree more. And the only consistent member in Deep Purple all the way through, correct?
That's right. He has never missed a gig. He has been on every song, every recording, period.
Yeah, you got that. You got, I think, John Lord's keyboards and organs. Very distinct, especially in the early Deep Purple. And that guitar player, what's his name? Richie something. Blackmore, is it? Yeah,
I think Blackmore was, yeah, he was the guy.
And then whoever's singing, because they've had 4 or 5 pretty damn good singers in that.
Yes, on this one, first 3 albums, we had Rod Evans, and then we have Nick Simper on bass, who was a fine bass player as far as I'm concerned. Interesting, Rod, of course, has kind of disappeared after the whole debacle with the new Deep Purple issue that happened. Won't get into that too much, but I will say I'm still hoping that on the Whoosh album cover, Rod is the guy behind the space mask, and he will at some point reveal himself and maybe come on the show or come on the Deep Purple podcast, talk to us about what he's been up to. I have confirmed that he is working in the medical profession somewhere in California, and that is the last anyone has reported of him. So, Rod, we love you. We wish you well. We hope you're doing great. Nick Simper appeared not too long ago on the Deep Purple podcast. Great interview they did with him, and he chimed in on some of their rankings albums, review shows, which was great. Glad to see he's still out there playing and still enjoying Deep Purple's music.
That is fantastic. I got to check that show out.
Yeah, he seems like such a nice guy, and it was really rough the way that the transition happened from Rod and Nick going into the Gillan and Glover era. But it's one of those things. I want to see how you feel about this. Thinking about bands like Van Halen, where you have the fallout with David Lee Roth, and then you get Sammy Hagar and you get Gary Cherone. Is there a part of you that goes, but what would have happened if they would have been able to stay together and put out another album? And what kind of music would we have gotten versus, but look what we did get because that happened?
Oh, 100%. It's, and as fans of those bands, especially older bands, you got a lot of time to think, right? Especially when they're not putting out anything new, which Van Halen hasn't since 2012.
Yeah.
And even then, it was like, they went back to Dave on that one. So you're always kind of what if. But you kind of look at who were the constants in the band at that time and what direction were they going. And in Van Halen, 80% of everything was the Van Halen brothers, right. Mostly Eddie even at that point, right? So he was in the band all the way through. So Dave wanted to go off and do show tunes and goofy covers and stuff like California Girls and all that. And, Eddie kind of wanted to take things more in a synth direction. So even after 1984, if Dave was still in the band, I think we still would have got, because there were synths all over Eat 'Em and Smile too. They still kind of would have moved in that direction. It wouldn't have been as good, I don't think. I don't know if that's really Dave's wheelhouse. It was kind of where they were progressing to in the 80s. Whereas Sammy Hagar, that's like right down his alley, right? So, same thing with a band like Deep Purple, like when you're talking about the, very distinct eras and very talented individuals kind of mixing in back and forth. You're like, well, what would have another record with the first, Mach 1 sounded like versus Mach 2? Or and how would that album in Mach 2 would have sounded with the Mach 1 lineup? You can't help but wonder about that stuff all the time.
Yeah, it's fascinating the transition too, because between one and two, you had the concerto, which was the second version of the band, but it wasn't a rock album. It was, them playing rock with an orchestra. It was a completely different thing. And then while they were doing that, they were working on Deep Purple and Rock, which was an incredibly heavy album compared to the first three Deep Purple albums, which are a little bit more psychedelic and of the '60s feel and sound. But you also had I played a clip on yesterday's show where John Lord was saying that they recorded their first album in a day. It isn't like now where they do a song a day or a couple songs a day. They literally did the whole thing in a day in overdubs, and then it was mixed the next day. And that's not a lot of time.
No, and that's how you release like 3 records a year sometimes. Like if you're Creedence Clearwater Revival, they did.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it is interesting. I think there are some songs that transition very well. I mean, in the live sets, you hear Ian Gillan singing some of the earlier songs, just because that's the material that they had to go out on stage with. And then over a couple of albums with the Mark II era, then pretty much those Mark I songs disappear, and then they bring back Hush later on. But yeah, it's fascinating. You want more of what you love, but then you love the new stuff. And you're like, yeah, I wish I had more of the old stuff, but look at what I'm getting now.
Yeah. In Van Halen, you wouldn't get 5150 with David Lee Roth.
That's right. And
record.
Another thing that Van Halen did that I thought was really amazing and intelligent was getting music placements in films, which I don't think would have happened with David Lee Roth. I feel like he was just not interested in that, which seems kind of counterintuitive because he likes to be everywhere.
Yeah, I'm not. He likes having control over everything, though. Like if you license a song to a movie, they could kind of put it in whatever, and I want to make sure that the script's up to snuff and all that kind of stuff. Normally, you just agree to license your song to a movie,
right?
Unless you're Led Zeppelin, and you just say no to everybody,
right?
Until the early 2000s, they actually started releasing songs for movies. But like for Eddie Van Halen to allow Iron Eagle to take a song, like no problem at all. To get a little extra scratch, a little extra exposure for the band. It's all good.
Well, speaking of licensing, Hush has certainly been in its fair share of media over the years. Child in Time, Deep Purple actually shares Twister with Van Halen because they had the version of Child in Time was played in the van when they were about to do their first chase.
That's right. Yeah, I forgot all about that, actually.
And Van Halen, they wrote that song for the movie, though, right?
They did, yeah.
Yeah. See, because there's licensing where you have an existing song that somebody licensed to put in their movie, and then you negotiate terms and figure out who needs to get paid and all that. And then there's when you actually get hired to write a song for the soundtrack.
Right, and that was actually a bone of contention with the Van Halen brothers and Sammy Hagar, because the director of Twister is a fellow by the name of Jan de Bont. And the Van Halen brothers were talking to him like, well, what do you want from this song? And he said, I just don't want you to mention tornadoes at all. Like, just make sure there's no mention of tornadoes. Give me a really cool rock tune. Like, okay. And then they tell Sammy that, and then Sammy comes back with this song all about tornadoes. And Alex is like, no, that's the last thing he wants. So they had this big fight, and finally Sammy just stream of conscience, whatever, over top of the beat with the big shine on chorus. But just, make sure there's no reference to tornadoes, because that's not what the filmmaker wants. Right. So
you had one job.
Coffin of the Van Hagar era.
You had one job. One job.
Yeah. Don't write a song about tornadoes, and it's just every other word was tornado.
Right. Well, that sounds like a disaster movie. I imagine you're going to get to Twister at some point on your show, I hope, because that's a really fantastic movie.
Twister and Twisters, the legacy sequel that came out last year, is a movie I enjoyed quite a bit. So yeah, we'll have to talk about those for sure.
I have not seen that yet, but it sounds like you'd recommend it.
I would, yeah. Very talented filmmaker. He did a movie a couple years ago called Minari that was very highly regarded, but he's actually from the Midwest in Tornado Alley. So he brought a lot of his own experiences into directing the film. And Glenn Powell, who was in Top Gun Maverick, Anyone But You, he's kind of the next up-and-coming big movie star. Very charismatic young man. He was in it and did a really good job. So in terms of legacy sequels and just good kind of summer popcorn action movies, fit the bill.
Nice. Well, it is on my list of movies to check out. I'll let you know what I think.
Sure, sounds good.
Well, let's get to today's song. We're talking about the 1968 big hit from Deep Purple, Hush. This song was not originally a big hit in Europe, but it took off in the States quite quickly. Band was flown out to America to open up for the final tour of a band that it's hard to believe that they were wrapping up at that point. And of course, I can't think of their name. Cream. Boy, it's funny. I have everything lined out ahead of doing these podcasts, and then I just go limp mentally, as I like to do often when I'm actually recording. So they were quickly kicked off of Cream's tour, and ended up the management put together the rest of an American tour very quickly, and they found some good success. Did another American tour. They were very busy during the Mark I era. And they even got to go on Hugh Hefner's show at the time, Playboy After Dark, and perform this song live. There is endless video of that on YouTube. Richie even gives Hugh a little bit of a guitar lesson with their big round bouffant haircuts and really shiny shirts. It's definitely something to watch. But you have to keep in perspective what the 60s were. Are you a big fan of 60s music in general, Corey, like Motown and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, I really like Motown, and as we're getting into this, it's a little more psychedelic, a little more hit and miss for me. But I find that when they hit pretty big, and when they miss, they kind of miss pretty big. Nothing, of course, beats "Listen to the Flower People" by skiffle group Spinal Tap, which is a big hit for them back in the '60s.
Well, the rumor is that Jimi Hendrix attended one of those concerts and went backstage and told Eric Clapton that watch out for that new guitar player. He's better than you, and that was the end of the opening act for Cream. That is a rumor. I've never heard that confirmed, but I have heard that from people who were supposedly in the room at the time. It wouldn't surprise me because Deep Purple was pretty explosive on stage right from the beginning, even though their albums were not quite what they were on stage, but they were just on fire in public.
Well, and Jimi Hendrix, I think, can recognize talent. He also had the Monkees opening for him at one point, so he knows talent when he sees it.
Yes, and that's a weird bill to think about.
It would have been a fun show, though. I'd go to that show.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Boy, if there's one of those, if you could be a fly on the wall in any time period, I think seeing Jimi Hendrix perform live would have been one of the things on my list.
Agreed.
Yeah. My favorite album by him, Are You Experienced, I covered a few years ago on the show. And to this day, I have a vinyl copy of it. And not the original release, but one of the first re-releases of it. And it's got crackle in it. It's got that, warm tape sound to it, but copy is really good. It sounds amazing.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah.
You're almost done your vinyl collection, aren't you?
I'm waiting on the last album to arrive. It's Uriah Heep's Chaos and Color, their newest album. I found a copy of it in turquoise vinyl, which is the one I was holding out for. And that's everything that I wanted on my principal collection. There's some stuff that's on my, if I ever find it for a good price list, like Deep Purple's Bananas. If you can find it and pay less than $450 for it, you are a rock star.
What era would that have been? Mark III, Mark IV?
I think that was 7. It's one of their early albums with Steve Morse on it, and this was at the end of them doing vinyl, so there's a very limited run of it. I think they did 5,000 copies, if that, and then the next album, or the album before that, they didn't even put out a vinyl. So this was, I think, just a limited run by the record company to see if it would be worth doing or not. So it's pretty rare, and every time it crops up, I'm like, okay, you're starting to bid at $100, and it's going to sell for $450 or more, and some people are selling it as high as $700. That's just a little crazy for me to pay for an album.
Well, for now,
yeah.
Just wait until this next album hits and you become a millionaire, then you can afford it. I love having those titles on my Discogs app, and then you'll get like an email like, oh. Different Kind of Truth just popped up. Great. How much is that? $480. Well, I can't afford that, so they'll just keep on looking.
Yeah. Here's your sarcastic teaser notification.
Oh, we found that copy of the album you wanted. It's $800.
That's right. But I do have an original pressing of Shades of Deep Purple from Tetragrammaton, the company partially owned by Bill Cosby, pre-Pudding Pop Bill Cosby. We won't go into what happened with him, But let's just say he was part owner of that record company that really did not know how to be a record company. But fortunately, one of the bands that they did back was an unknown Deep Purple. And we get this song. Let's check it out. Corey, what do you say?
Let's do it.
Here is Hush. All right. What are your first impressions of this opening?
Well, I like the I love the bass chugging along. I like the organ stabs we're getting. The first thing that always pops in my mind is how much more I like this version than the original.
Mm.
Like I was listening to that one earlier today, the Billy Joe Royal version, and it's a little slower paced.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a little more kind of lackadaisical. This has a little more drive, a little more purpose to it. I really like. One thing I do like about the original, though, is that it was one of Billy Joe Royal's biggest hits, but it wasn't even that big of a hit. Like it didn't crack the top 40, but he actually named his second record Billy Joe Royal featuring Hush. So very rarely does a song that doesn't even really become a huge hit for you garner enough attention that it becomes part of the title of your second album.
Right. And was it on both albums?
I think so. I'm not quite sure. I'll look that up. Yeah.
It wasn't too uncommon for bands in the 50s and 60s to record a song a couple of times. If it was a hit, originally maybe you had another backing band that recorded it, and then your band was put together. That was really, really common in, when you're looking at like the Motown times, like one band would record a lot of the songs that you would hear on the radio. They would hire a singer, and then they would put a band together for that singer that would go on tour. And then you would have like the Wrecking Crew be the ones in the studio recording it. Then you have your band, so the band would re-record it as a band. So it did happen quite a bit. Also, if a song was popular, I mean, you think about like Elvis and how many people did the same songs that Elvis did right around the same time. That was just the thing. Like, I'll record my version, you record your version. It was all done very respectfully. Whereas now it's like, well, my lawyer is going to make sure that we get paid and we get we get mentioned and credit and all that. But back then, people really didn't care that much. It was, we're all friends. We're all going to record a song that we like, and we'll just see who makes it to the top.
And that was kind of cool. I know it happened a lot more sparingly since then. An example that pops into mind for me right away is a song called Hide Your Heart, which was written, I believe, by Paul Stanley and Desmond Child, that they kind of sent away for other artists because it didn't seem like Kiss was going to cover it. Then Kiss did a version. But Ace Frehley also did a version because it was the publishing rights were kind of out there. So he picked them up and he recorded his version. So I think in the exact same calendar year, you had a Kiss version of the song Hide Your Heart and then an Ace Frehley version of Hide Your Heart. It's odd how it kind of came about. Where like, guys will write a song and kind of release it into a pool. Other artists can kind of pick and choose and cover it and what have you. So we had Ace Frehley covering a Paul Stanley Kiss tune, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, and then you get bands that will take a song and be inspired by it and kind of do their own thing. And I'll get to this when I get to In Rock. And Deep Purple's Child in Time was actually inspired by a band called It's a Beautiful Day and a song called Bombay Calling. And then the band heard that and said, oh, well, on our next album, we're going to take one of your songs, Wring That Neck, and we'll do our version of it. And, there was no lawsuit over it. No one cared. It was, let's just make music and have fun.
I always appreciate that. Like, Tom Petty more than once actually got ripped off by other artists, and he would be asked like journalists, like, why didn't you sue so-and-so for stealing your chord progression from this song? He'd be like, yeah, it's just music. There's only so many chords and only so many ways you can play them.
Yeah.
So it's fine. You have the rare instance where it's like Ghostbusters versus Huey Lewis and the News, where it actually goes to a trial, and Huey Lewis now gets a little bit every time you play Ghostbusters or watch the movie. So in that situation, I don't really blame Huey Lewis, because you try to make your money when you can, right? But for the most part, artists are like, it's all good. Yeah. Well, and then the guys who sued Led Zeppelin over Stairway to Heaven too, I guess they weren't real happy.
Yeah, that finally ended after a decade of a trial.
Yeah, it was crazy. It just ended like a year or two ago.
And they got nothing.
Exactly.
And all that, I can't imagine how much they were out in attorneys' fees and court fees and all that. And then just to, I mean, I don't blame people for taking their shot. I'm kind of in the middle. I like to protect. If I came up with something and somebody directly rips it off, at least note it. Like at least say, hey, we were inspired by this, or contact me, or let me know. Let's talk about it. I'm not gonna eat your lunch over it. I'm not trying to make money off of you. I feel the same way about it. It's all just music, but at least let's cross promote. I'll promote your thing that my thing inspired, and you promote my thing that your thing that was inspired, and let's work with each other instead of against each other.
That's a great attitude. So when I come up with my debut album, Metal Sauna, I can come to you and we're going to cross promote.
Someone suggested that to me earlier this year last year that they would like me to do a metal sauna album. And it goes against every rule that I have for making mental sauna music, because, I take the attack off of everything, and you can't really have a metal album without attack, right? So it's going to be interesting to see if I can find a way to do that. But it is actually on my potential project list.
I think that'd be amazing.
Yeah. Relax to songs like Pulling All Your Teeth Out.
Some folks find that relaxing.
They might, yeah. Yeah, back in the days of nitrous oxide, when I was here, they don't do that, I don't think, anymore, at least not in the States. But I remember when I went and got my wisdom teeth pulled out, and they used to give you those little, remember the foam earbuds from the 80s? They were like those really thin headphones, and you got just that little foam round disc that looked like a donut.
Yep.
So they put those on, and they start piping in the nitrous oxide, and they put on Enya. And as I'm getting my wisdom teeth extracted, I'm hearing Orinoco Flow as a beach ball inside my head, just slowly moving from one side to the other, like that video box, when you had your VCR on pause.
Logo's doing the thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it felt like that, just kind of moving from one side to the other. And to this day, I cannot listen to that song without remembering feeling of that. And I'm like, I don't do drugs, but I get why people do.
I love that we went back to, remember back when they used nitrous oxide.
Yeah, those were the days.
I miss.
You know what I miss is Hush. Let's get back to it.
Alrighty.
She's on my mind. No doubt about it, she looks so fine. She's the best girl that I ever had. Sometimes you're gonna make me feel so bad.
I love the tempo that they picked. And as you said earlier, the Billy Joe Royal version was a little bit slower. This is so much more danceable, something that would have easily been a hit in the clubs. Why they picked it to go on the Hugh Hefner show. It just has a great energy to it.
It really does. And it fits kind of the temperament of the song, too. You got lyrics like, I had a certain little girl, she's on my mind, no doubt about it. She looks so fine. Mm-hmm. She's the best girl that I ever had. Sometimes you're going to make me feel so bad. Like, pretty generic kind of stock rock lyrics. Mm-hmm. So you really kind of need the right tempo for it, like you said. And I think they knocked it out of the park. And really, the standouts for me on this version were Rod Evans and John Lord. Holy cow. Like it's the organs for me that kind of does it. I'm a guitar guy, but for me on this track, it's the organs.
I really think that throughout the catalog of Deep Purple, and there's times when John Lord kind of sits back when they reform and get into Perfect Strangers, he's a little more in the background. But I think that you're going to find a lot of the organ I think you're going to like as we go through these songs. I agree. And even during the verse, just that little da-da, da-da that he's playing, it's not anything amazing, impressive. He's just kind of just throwing in an accent here and there. But it really just brings about another depth in the music that you wouldn't get if you were just playing rhythm.
Absolutely. And those little stabs he was doing at being just a little up and down, a little stab, just, okay, I'm still here kind of thing. And I know that, Deep Purple, I think, is considered kind of a rock or like a guitar driven band, especially with Richie Blackmore in there. But To me, when I'm listening to this song, it's like, is Richie still in the band? Because all I'm hearing is organs, and I'm not mad at it.
Right. Yeah, it's weird because this being such a big hit and a mainly guitar-oriented band, that organ would be more in the forefront. But you get a little bit of Richie. You get those trills there in the beginning, in between the na-na-nas, and just that diddle-dun-dun, and that's such a common thing for him to do, especially with the Renaissance music he's doing now. There's tons and tons of trills and that kind of music. But yeah, I think it's really well mixed too for something that was thrown together so quickly. I think the recording's great. I think the mix is great. I can hear everything. I love how chunky the bass sounds, and it really drives that rhythm. The only thing I would like is a little more punchy kick drum, because I think the kick drum's a little bit buried, but the snare sounds good.
It really does. Yeah, it's a little missing some bottom end for me. But that's kind of consistent with 1960s production techniques, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's just because you're playing everything on mono, just kind of through your stereo speakers, right? Whereas nowadays you want to remix that, like you said, a little kickier kick drum, make the bass a little more prominent, little things like that. Bass is there, but like it's a little shrill, it's a little high up in the register.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, if you're looking at a waveform, you're not getting a ton of peaks and valleys on this. Everything's kind of right in the middle, which is fine, but it would sound a little bit darker, a little more earthy if you had a little more bottom end on there.
Right. And remember too, mastering wasn't really a thing back then. I mean, they kind of did it, but it was really just an EQ and a compressor, and they're like, yeah, that's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why they could master it in a day, right? They recorded it one day, they mixed it, mastered it in the second day, and away you go.
The beauty of that was that there was no brick wall limiting in 1968, and thank God for that.
Yes, no kidding.
Because this song would sound horribly bad brick walled.
Just horribly everything. Just, oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Let's continue. That kind of guitar playing, those little licks that we're getting from Richie, that's the kind of stuff that you're really going to hear a lot of.
And that's the kind of stuff that kind of makes this stand out. Because it could very much be kind of just middle of the road, late 1960s kind of stuff that everybody was pumping out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the organs elevated. I think those guitars elevated. And just like the na-na-na-na-na sections, I think are a great little melodic touch. And then that leads you into the hush hush chorus.
Mm-hmm.
That just little things here and there that kind of elevate this past being just like a stock 1960s. Come on, people, now smile on your brothers, everybody get together type of tune.
Yeah, and I think because you've got some really solid virtuoso musicians in this band. Richie had been doing sessions with Joe Meek. He was on so much stuff that people probably don't even realize he played on. And you've got John Lord, who is classically trained. You've got Ian Pace, who is, comes from the world of jazz. You've got a real variety of feelings. And then you put all these people together from different areas and say, all right, go make something. And everybody's going to kind of want to show off their chops a little bit. And I think that that's one thing I really love about Deep Purple's music, is that there's a lot of personality in every instrument.
It really is. I was just kind of thinking the same thing when I was thinking about the drums.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just Ian Pace seems like a really cool guy. I've never heard him in an interview or anything, but how he's performing this song, I think is really interesting. And he'd be like a really interesting dude. Sit down and have a beer over.
Yeah.
Because like just nothing is hit out of place. It's like it has so much personality.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, every instrument seems to have that, and the vocals as well. This is what I think makes Deep Purple one of those bands that transcends kind of genres and kind of going from the 60s to 70s to 80s to 90s. Even currently, I was listening to their latest record because you kind of listed all the songs and said pick which shows you wanted to be on. I'm like, well, I know there's a song on their new record I really like, and I know there's a song on their first record I really like, which is kind of cool because it's a lot of time in between.
Yeah, 50 years. Yeah, pretty much. Or 50, what is it? So 68, so a long time. I'm not doing math right now, but it's amazing how their sound has changed. Of course, production tools, different bands, different eras of music, even the Beatles evolved from doing the skiffle kind of music that really the na-na-na parts, that's really kind of skiffle. And in general, I'm really not a fan of that kind of thing, but it's so catchy. How do you not sing it? How do you not go with the Beatles? She loves you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it just feels good. You know,
Yeah.
it's simple, it's plain, it should be boring, but for some reason it's fun.
Good bands will take common stuff and elevate it.
Mhm.
And that's a perfect example because you listen to the Billy Joe Royal version of Hush and it's fine.
Yeah.
Nothing special.
Mhm.
Whereas this, I think, is something special.
If you really want to have some fun, listen to the original Yardbirds version of Still I'm Sad and then listen to it by Rainbow.
Okay.
Vast differences. The Yardbird version sounds like a funeral march, and Rainbow's version is actually pretty exciting. The other thing too is I think about bands like that were big at the time, like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. I mean, these three bands were considered the forerunners of heavy metal, and you could put Uriah Heep in there too. They're often talked about as another one. But most of that music is pretty much here's the chorus, here's the verse. It's pretty much here's how this is played. But with Deep Purple, I feel like, okay, what am I going to play on this passage? What am I going to throw in there that's going to set this verse off from the last verse? There's always those little things that they put in that just keep it interesting. It's not rinse, repeat.
Well, and I love how, like you said, you're just kind of on the edge of your seat. Like you're coming into a na section. What's Ian going to do there?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of role is he going to do on the drums? And he just, and then you go back into it. And it's like just those little punches I'm really enjoying.
Yeah, and I think as a drummer, I think when I get to Mandrake Root, I think you'll really like that song.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good.
There's a lot of good fun drums in that. Let's see what the boys have to say next.
She got love like quicksand. Only took one touch of her hand. Blow my mind and I'm in so deep that I can't eat y'all and I can't sleep.
I really love that they didn't do anything special after that chorus, that they just went back to the rhythm, because they're kind of saving all the energy for the fire that comes after the last chorus.
Well, even there, when we got the love section like that, the band's that builds to like this little mini climax within the song. And again, like, Ian's going to fucking town. Like he's just having a grand old time. And then, just take it back down and do. It's almost like, the rhythm of making love, if you will. You kind of build it up and then you slow it down. Kind of get back into a little bit of groove. And then you want to build for the big final climax, if you will.
Yeah, I read about that in a pop-up book. Yeah, it's really, I think the construction of the song, the looking at it and going, here's how we're going to do it, I think is really brilliant, because they do give you that. You just think it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and progress, but they give you that breath. Let's take it down a minute, and then we'll build it back up again, and then it's really going to go.
Yeah, I think it's too. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm struggling with the word I'm looking for here, but it's almost too predictable to kind of do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And have like a little 2-minute and 30-second kind of filler track, whereas these guys went, nope, we're going to take you here, then we're going to bring it down, we're going to build, we're just going to let you kind of slide with it, we're going to play some stuff, and then it ebbs and flows like all good tunes do.
I think what's difficult, and I want to see how you feel about this, but what's difficult to me is the idea of trying to understand hearing this on the radio for the first time in 1968. We didn't have Van Halen. We barely had Led Zeppelin. There's so much of what we know now didn't exist. And while I look back at lyrics from those days and I think, wow, that's so cliche, but it wasn't cliche when it came out. All the songs that are like, my love is for you is as tall as a mountain and deep as the ocean, and all those things that here now are so played out. But back then it was pretty fresh concept. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that.
It was an interesting year. I'm just kind of looking at other songs that released that year. Moni Moni came out that year. I Thank You, Sam and Dave. People Got to Be Free. You Keep Me Hanging On.
Wow.
That was a gooder. Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. Daydream Believer by the aforementioned Monkees. And It Got a DeVita came out in 68.
Wow. And a couple of those would go on to be bigger hits again in the 80s. Billy Idol doing Moni Moni and Kim Wilde doing You Keep Me Hanging On. A lot of, and it's funny too, because when you first hear these, you don't necessarily know their covers. If you grew up in the 80s and the first thing you hear is Billy Idol doing Moni Moni, you don't necessarily know that's a cover song.
Exactly. No.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a different time, though. I mean, those are some interesting songs and interesting versions of them too. I never really cared for Moni Moni. That's just not my style of music. But You Keep Me Hanging On is a great song. But you listen to the Kim Wilde version, it's kind of like this. It's exciting, it's dramatic, it's passionate. And you listen to the original version, you're like, it's kind of dry.
Yeah, yeah, kind of the same thing. And just wait till later when we play the Milli Vanilli version of Hush. You're going to hear how progressive it gets.
Oh dear God. Let's get back to the song.
She got love like quicksand. Only took one touch of her hand. Blow my mind and I'm in so deep that I can't eat y'all and I can't sleep. Listen, hush, hush. Thought I heard her calling my name. Now hush, hush. She broke my heart, but I love her just same. Now hush, hush. Thought I heard her calling my name. Now hush, hush. I need the loving and I'm not to blame now.
I don't know if you were paying much attention to the bass, but I love the bass during this section because he's altered what he's playing and he's going up and down and he's kind of all over the neck.
Very, very cool. I was listening more to Richie in those instrumental sections because I really love what he was doing with the guitar there.
Yeah. And it's interesting because now that's like all he does. He'll just noodle through a whole song. And it's almost like he's just going to play his part. And then whatever the song does, the song does. As long as he's in the right key, he's fine. And it all works.
Well, and as a newbie to Deep Purple and Richie Blackmore in a lot of ways, my introduction to him was kind of the Down to Earth record from Rainbow. Which I finally got on vinyl, listened front to back quite a bit, which is a little more commercial sounding, a little more riff driven, right? Which I get the impression isn't really Richie Blackmore. So to hear these little trills and stuff, these little sections he's putting in these like brief moments before the na-na-nas come back in or before we get to Hush, he's like, okay, I've got how many bars to work with? I'm going to make it as interesting as humanly possible. Like that's really kind of neat. I could see why he influenced a whole ton of guitar players, including Eddie Van Halen, who just loved Richie Blackmore's playing.
Until they met,
because it turns out Richie kind of a dink. But
yeah, well, he hates tapping, and that's a huge part of Eddie's repertoire. So that was not going to go well, which is unfortunate. Right. And they say never meet your heroes, and unfortunately sometimes that's true. I've been fortunate enough to meet a couple of mine, and it's worked out very well. But, it's interesting because that Down to Earth record was a huge change in direction from Rainbow, coming from albums like Rising and Long Live Rock and Roll, going into a decidedly more commercial tone. But that was very planned, and part of why. Yeah, part of why Ronnie left the band because he didn't want to go in that direction. He wanted to, keep doing the kind of stuff that they were doing. And Richie was like, no, I want to do something more commercial. He wanted to be in the charts and, that kind of thing. So it was definitely an interesting turn. But yeah, his playing did change a lot. If you really want to hear what he was like, I would say Rainbow Rising would probably be a more natural album. But he did a lot of, I love all the Rainbow albums. But I would say, yeah, there was definitely a change in his playing after that.
Interesting. Yeah. Really interesting history between like Deep Purple and Rainbow and kind of all these bands that are kind of intertwined amongst each other, right? That's you could do like a whole series of documentaries. I feel like in the Richie Blackmore era of music.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Deep Purple family tree is just insane. And then when, Ian joins Black Sabbath for a year, Glenn Hughes was on a Sabbath album, who's a bass player later on with the band. And it just, now you've got to connect the Sabbath tree to, and Ronnie was in Black Sabbath and in Rainbow. So it's just an insane looking thing. It looks like a dungeon map of a game you don't want to play.
It's just crazy. All the people that have been in Deep Purple: John Lord, Richie Blackmore, Rod Evans, Nick Simper, David Coverdale, Glenn Hughes, Tommy Bolin, Joe Lynn Turner, Joe Satriani, and Steve Morse.
Goodness. And unfortunately, they never recorded with Joe Satriani. He filled in when Richie quit in the middle of a tour. And so they never did any studio work. They offered him a spot, and I think they talked about it, but they both kind of agreed that it really wasn't going to work. And he had a big enough solo career. He had some other stuff planned. So it would have been interesting to see how they wrote together.
would have been really cool. Yeah, I just saw Joe Satriani this past fall.
That's right. Yeah.
Hagar and the Boys, and man, that boy can wail on the guitar.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very intense player and great writer on his solo stuff. Songs like War and Big Bad Moon, songs that I've played as a drummer that are a lot of fun. And yeah.
Satch Boogie.
Satch Boogie, yeah. And when he was with Deep Purple, they did a little bit of that live.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which was interesting to hear. Let's get back to Hush.
Alrighty.
I got a certain little girl, she's on my mind. No doubt about it, she looks so fine. The best girl that I ever had. She gonna make me feel so bad. Yeah, make me feel so bad. She got love like quicksand. Only tickle touch my hand. Blow my mind and I'm in so deep. Can't hear it. Oh, I can't sleep.
Sweet baby Jesus.
John Lord, ladies and gentlemen.
I mean, was that an amazing solo or what?
My goodness. R.I.P. John Lord. Wow. What a performance, eh?
Yeah. I love that he left breathing room in there. He didn't just cover it with notes. He left a little bit of spot for the rhythm to shine through and then came back in. But that last chord at the end going into the chorus, that's just amazing.
Again, it's kind of the rhythm of lovemaking, right? You start off good, you build, and nope, we're going to take her down a notch, and then we're going to let it breathe. And then all you're getting for a little while there is just bass. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you get a little more. And then they have big explosion at the end. My goodness, John Lord, what a keyboard.
And what you probably felt more than heard, because how can you not be focusing on the solo, is Ian Pace putting in a lot more snare accents in there, just kind of building up along with John. Rhythms staying very solid. Richie actually really laying back and just letting John shine in this part. He's not throwing in anything extra. He's just, I'm just going to be the rhythm here, which is pretty rare, but it works.
It absolutely works. And I think if you had like competing instruments there, it wouldn't.
Yeah.
Because your ears would be able to tell, right? It would give you a headache when you have like guitar try to compete with organ there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, obviously talented musicians doing the smart thing. I'm just going to lay back and let John Lord do his thing. That's what the song needs, and knock it out of the park. Then you have that big run by Ian Pace to take us back into the no. Just like, okay, enough of that. Back to the song.
Yeah. Exactly. And it is very common, especially in this era of the band, where they do trade-off solos. So you'll get Richie playing a solo, and then the next pass, it'll be John playing the solo. That's very common in the early eras, while they were really trying to figure out who they wanted to be. And then, of course, they changed the lineup and they changed their sound completely. But there is a lot of that trade-off between the two of them. And I think it was like a really friendly competition to see who could outdo the other one, especially on stage.
That's awesome. I'm going to look up some live performances, if there are many, of Hush with John Lord and Richie Blackmore. I think that'd be a ton of fun.
There's not a lot of good recorded quality ones, I would say. The recordings from the Mark I era are pretty sketchy, most of them. Inglewood 68 is probably about the best one that comes to mind. But it's definitely a song that you really felt live just as much.
Now, John Lord was in Whitesnake as well. Was he on the self-titled Whitesnake that in the mid-'80s or?
No. That was his departure. He left Whitesnake to reform Deep Purple. The last album he was on for Whitesnake was Slide It In.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I thought he was on Here I Go Again.
There are some keyboards, but that is not him.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember who played those, but that album was really a change in sound for them. They still kept a little bit of the keyboards, but that might have even been Don Airey, who is now in Deep Purple.
Really?
Yeah. I know he did some keyboard work with them. I can't remember if it was that album or the one after, Slip of the Tongue. But yeah, he was a session player for a lot. He played with Ozzy. He played on a lot of stuff. But he was in Rainbow. He's on Down to Earth. Had the pleasure of meeting him in Michigan and then in Chicago in August. Really nice guy. So I've now met 3/5 of the people that were on Down to Earth, and that was a really big moment for me.
Well, here's something I didn't know about Whitesnake is that they've done two versions of Here I Go Again.
Mm-hmm.
One in 82, one in 87. So John Lord did play on the 82 version.
Yes.
But it was like Don Airy on the 87 version. So
yes.
I don't know if I've ever heard the 82 version of Here I Go Again.
It's slower. It's more bluesy.
Okay.
There's a difference in the lyrics too. The chorus was "Here I go again on my own, like a hobo. I was born to walk alone," and apparently that probably sounded too much like homo, and so he changed it to drifter, which was a common lyric. And then there's a third version of it, which David Coverdale really didn't like. It was kind of a studio produced. We're going to put little pingly sounds in there and make it just sound pretty, and
oh no.
Yeah, it didn't. I think it was for a movie. It was for. There was a reason that they did it, and I can't remember what it was now. But yeah. So again, like there's just so much crossover between the Deep Purple band and then all these other related bands. But yeah, the first version from Saints and Sinners is the second one I heard because I heard 87 before I got Saints and Sinners. Ian Pace is also on that as well.
Oh wow, really?
Mm-hmm.
On the Saints and Sinners version?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, because the drummer in 87, that was Ainsley Dunbar, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But interestingly, so they record Saints and Sinners, Ian Pace is on it, then he leaves the band, Cozy Powell joins, but the record company didn't want to pay for Cozy to re-record the album tracks, so they just went with Ian Pace on the album and then Cozy live.
Okay. Well, you can't go wrong with either drummer.
Yeah, I mean, both just masters of their craft. As you've heard plenty of Cozy on Down to Earth. And
plenty of Cozy on Cinderella Records.
That's right. Yeah, I still can't believe I covered that whole album and didn't realize that was Cozy. I'm getting old, Corey. Let's finish off this song. One thing I think is really important in the performance of this song is the way that John just does those runs up and down the keyboard, especially there at the end. He's playing a much heavier and louder rhythm. And then he's also doing those runs up and down the keys. And it just really makes this song so alive.
And I love that. I was reading a quote from Richie Blackmore where he talked about doing this song and said, well, we'll have to change the arrangement. But it just seemed like a good song for Deep Purple to cover. And those instincts, I think, serve them well because he's exactly right. Like there's some bands that can hear a song and say, I can do a cover of this. And then it exceeds kind of what the original did. Apologies to Kevin Brown. I think of what Van Halen did with You Really Got Me, as opposed to the Kinks version.
Yeah.
Kinks have a good tune. Van Halen just, elevated it. And kind of the same thing here. Hush was a decent tune done by Billy Joe Royal, but Deep Purple takes it and just sends it into the stratosphere.
Yeah, and I agree with you about Van Halen. Not sure so much on Pretty Woman, only because of the 40-minute guitar opening. If it was just the song and I can get the video out of my head with the midgets, I think I'd like it more. But I do love the Roy Orbison version. But are you in general a guy who likes the first version that you hear of a song more than the second version, regardless of which one came first in the chronology of life?
I don't know if being first matters. I'm trying to think of, okay, Slade, Come On, Feel the Noise. I know I like the Quiet Ride version better, and I did hear that one first, so maybe there's something to that. I don't know.
Yeah, I've often pondered whether it's we tend to like it more because it's the first one we heard, or just that, it's fitting in with our current music and current tastes. It's so hard to say, but I tend to find that for me, the one I hear first is typically the one I like the most.
There's one exception to that rule for me, and that's when I heard this, which is the Milli Vanilli version of Hush. Isn't this something?
It sounds so forced and programmed.
Why? Because there's not an instrument on it? Because
Right. I mean, this is why drum machines should have never been invented.
So I did hear this one before I heard the Deep Purple version. I gotta tell you, I like the Deep Purple version better.
Thank you. I feel so much better about our relationship.
Oh, wait till the lead vocals kick in, though.
Oh, God. Ash?
It sounds like hash, which is what they were smoking when they came up with this arrangement.
They must have been, yeah. You know, it's interesting because that definitely has like a late 80s sound to it. And I kind of, it actually sounds like a side project that Ian Gillan and Roger Glover did together called Accidentally on Purpose. And I covered that on the Haskincast podcast. It's a lot of program stuff with a nice fretless bass over it. And it's a really interesting project that they put out after House of Blue Light. And it has like a similar production sound to it, you know, with the program percussion and all that. But yeah, that's an interesting take, I'll just say, to be polite. So Deep Purple was on Rockline in 1985 when they were reforming to promote Perfect Strangers. Interestingly, this particular episode of Rockline was recorded 2 nights before I would see the band for the first time. They recorded this in Detroit. The show was broadcast in California, hosted by Bob Coburn. Did you ever listen to Rockline, Corey?
I don't know if we ever got it up here, to be honest with you.
This was an amazing show because it was a call-in show where they would feature a different band every week, and you could call in and directly talk to the band live. And if you think about, you know, the mid 80s, we didn't have access to the bands or individual musicians like we do now. There was no social media. You couldn't reach out and hope to get a letter back, at least from a publicist or something. You just, unless you knew somebody, you were never going to get anywhere near these people. But with Rockline, you could. And so people would call in and ask questions, and the band would answer them or not answer them, or, you know, however they wanted to do it. And so in 1985, Deep Purple was in Detroit, and they were on Rockline. And I've got a little clip that I want to play.
Michael, this question directed at Ian. I know you didn't originally sing Hush, but did you ever think about doing it in concert?
I'm sorry?
The song Hush, you didn't sing the original studio version, but are you doing it in concert? That's the question.
No. The answer to that is no.
The answer is no.
You did sing it once in the early days.
That's right. We used to do quite a few. In the sort of transitory period between Deep Purple Mark 1 and Deep Purple Mark 2, we did Mandrake Root and Hush and This Bird Has Flown and quite a few other bits and pieces. And in actual fact, they were great songs for me to sing at the time, but as time went on, I think we established a sort of a slightly different pattern of making music. And those really those songs are resting with history now, I think, quite simply. They were great to sing, but no longer part of what...
The answer is no.
Back to that.
No, but a lot of sympathy with... I did enjoy singing them, if that's any consolation.
That was Ian Pace chiming in to get everything back on track, as a drummer would do, and as he does in Hush when he's had enough of John Lord's noodling.
The answer is no. Let's move on.
Just no. Get out. They did record another version, though. There was a version that came out on a live album called Nobody's Perfect that was recorded during the House of Blue Light tour in 87. And this was actually recorded in the studio. And when they went back on Rockline to promote Nobody's Perfect, Roger Glover talked a little bit about this.
Now, there is one new studio song on the album. It's a new studio version of Hush. And what led to re-recording that? And somebody also told me that was done in one take. Is that true?
Yeah, it is true. It's a studio cut as such, but it's not a bona fide studio cut. It has its place on the live album because it is a live jam. We had sort of thought about doing Hush a few times during the show, but we never got around to doing it. In fact, we did it once, and it didn't really work out very well. This time it happened, we had some equipment in the studio for writing purposes, and we came back from the pub one night and had a fun night, and Hush was one of those one-off occasions. It just happened to work.
It sure did work.
Crowed. As the cock crowed, yeah.
So they did go ahead and record a new version of it. And we're going to check that out, Corey. But first, any final thoughts on the original studio version of Hush?
Good tune.
Yeah. It's one that crops up. I hear it, occasionally when I would get in my car. It would sometimes be playing on the radio if I could find a station that wasn't playing some Aerosmith song or AC/DC, which seemed to be every station I could find. And I've heard it in the grocery store. I've heard it in movies. It still has quite a life all these years later.
The classics never die. Now, this version we're going to hear, I don't know if it kind of reaches that level.
Mm-hmm.
It very much sounds like a jam, doesn't it? Where it's just kind of like just starts playing something, and they just kind of go along with it. So I don't think it reaches the levels of the version we just heard, but it's an interesting outtake.
I will agree with that. I think it's just you could feel that they were just having a fun night. It's not one that I very often go back and listen to, because if I want to hear Hush, I'll listen to the version we just listened to.
Exactly.
That's the one for me. But let's check it out. Well, you get a little bit of Ian Gillan's Black Sabbath days there in the song with that scream. Pretty nice. I like that they didn't put in the first chorus, that they just went right into the next verse.
Did you miss the na-nas at the beginning, though? I was kind of missing that. It's like that's why it kind of feels like a jam. Like they're just kind of...
Yeah, it would have been nice to have the first ones, but then after the first verse to just go into that little return to the rhythm and then right into the second verse without repeating the na-nas, I thought was kind of nice. If you're going to redo the song, change it up a little bit. I mean, have a reason to redo it. Yeah.
But still, you got to give it kind of the presence of the old. Like I'm not mad at it either. I just kind of prefer the original.
Right. I mean, it definitely feels like that 80s production. You know, it has that studio sound. It feels a little bit warped at the beginning with the synthesizers, but you get that rhythm organ again. You get Richie doing his a little bit of his just kind of soloing there. And I like that part.
Yeah, me too.
Bass is a little more staccato.
Yeah. A little more generic, yeah. I don't know.
I think that takes away from it a little bit. I think the rhythm doesn't flow as well in this one because it feels more clipped.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I was trying to put my finger on what exactly feels most different about it, and like the construction of the intro. And wasn't it a wolf on the original version at the beginning? Here we got like a
yeah.
Wolf is cooler. Wolf is cooler than.
Well, I think the wolf meant it more. He was more into the song.
He was more into it, absolutely. Yeah, he put it into it.
Yeah, this thing sounds like it's running for its life and just screaming for help. And the wolf was like, "We're doing a song."
Yeah, if I was ranking versions of Hush, it'd be 68. It would be the 80 version, and then it would be the original. Then it'd be 40 layers of garbage, and then it would be the Milli Vanilli. So
yeah, where does this one fall in comparison to Milli Vanilli?
Well, it's a second.
Okay, good. Let's get back to it.
My name now, Hush. She took my heart, but I love her just the same now, Hush. Oh, I thought I heard her call my name now, Hush, Hush. her loving, but I'm not to blame now. Got a hurry in the morning, late in the evening. Whoa! Ha! Yeah! Come on!
One thing that this version has that I think was missing in the first one that I mentioned is the kick drum. We really get a nice punchy kick drum on this one. That's one thing I do like about this version, because in 39 years, they found a much better way to record Ian Pace.
And the one thing I'm missing is like some harmony vocals or something to help with touches, because kind of struggling a little bit. You could tell again, first take.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, there must have been some kind of overdub, at least of the chorus vocals, because but I think it was just Ian. I don't think there's anyone else on it.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but yeah, something a little more band oriented would have been nice, but that wasn't their style at the time.
Nope. Fair enough.
Live it would be eventually, but I think even live they weren't. There nobody was doing backups. Now in the 60s. John Lord and Nick Simper would also sing. You can see in the Playboy video, both of them with a microphone, and they're both up there singing. Of course, Ian Pace and Richie don't, but that was something that they lost when Roger and Ian joined. They stopped doing that, so it changed the band in a lot of ways.
Well, that's interesting. And I was just kind of looking, like, are Deep Purple currently playing Hush on the tour for the latest record? And apparently they are. They
are. Yeah, they did a great version of it at both shows that I saw. It's part of their encore along with Black Knight, which had some really bizarre video on the screen that I don't think any of us that were in attendance understood what was going on. Some sort of drunk stumbling guy that why, I don't know, but he's having a time.
Interesting. Alrighty.
Yep. All right, let's wrap this one up.
Thought I heard her calling my name now. Hush, hush, I need the loving and I'm not to blame now.
You know, I feel like the rhythm was missing there before that last chorus. After the harmonica solo, the rhythm kind of came back, but it seemed a little bit thin. Like the guitars weren't very much up front. They're a little fuzzy. I don't know. It felt weird.
It did. It was hard to tell because what I'm hearing is just coming through Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not getting the nuances you are.
Yeah.
I don't like the trade-off of the John Lord organ with the Ian Gillan harmonica. Which is fine harmonica part, but I was just kind of missing the organs there.
Yeah, and it did put a little bit of a Western edge to it, which I wasn't expecting the first time I heard it. I'm like, oh, this is definitely different. This is definitely jam night after the bar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Although Richie's guitar, I thought, sounded a lot better than it does on the 68 version, like just production-wise.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was using a Gibson Les Paul, I think, back then, and now he's got the Fender Strat, which I think is much more suited to rock and roll. I think the Gibson sounded good for the time. But yeah, his sound improved so much over the years, and that's something he worked really hard at. He actually used to use an Echoplex on stage, so he's actually recording himself the whole time just to get the Echoplex sound. Pretty amazing what they used to go through to get sound back then.
I'll tell you what, don't tell Slash, though, that Gibson is not the sound of rock and roll.
Well, I think Slash kind of reinvented it in the modern day. But I shouldn't say that, too, because Mick Box plays a Gibson and... sounds fantastic. But the old one that Richie had, I think, was really good for the day. But for the sound he was going for, I think the Strat works much better, which he switched to, I think, after In Rock.
Okay.
So, yep, good times. It's okay. For what it is, it's fine. But it doesn't have the same energy. For one, Ian Pace's style changed quite a bit when they did Perfect Strangers. He was laying back a lot more than he was when he was. I mean, but when they recorded Hush originally, I think he was 18 or 19 years old, and he's just a kid, full of energy. He's in a rock band. A big difference between that and somebody who then is well versed in music, looking more to play with the times and playing more straightforward. You're missing John Lord all over this. I mean, he's great in the rhythm side of this version, but we don't have the explosive John Lord that we would be waiting for.
You're missing just kind of a lot of the personality, maybe a lot of the soul out of it, right? And it's cool to say, oh yeah, we did, it belongs on the live record because we did it in one take in the studio and just recorded it live off the floor. But had they rehearsed it first, you probably would have got a lot more interesting track. Where, like you said, Ian Pace, he's just kicking back. I think he had like one run in there that I remember near the end, and that was about it.
Yeah.
And John Lord too, and there were two of the standouts on the 1968 version.
Exactly, and I think with the rhythm section being a little more muted, that kind of takes away some of the energy, like I said earlier. So I mean, it's a fine version. You had some fun at the pub. You get behind the equipment. Now let's do Hush. And the tape's running. I think for what it is, it's fine. But if I were to say, to compare the two versions, I'd have to go 100% with the first one.
As would I.
Yeah. But it's a fun song. Even with this, I could see this maybe having a place in more modern dance clubs where they're doing, more 80s music and has that 80s feel to it a little bit without being too synthy, although it is at the beginning. I think it could be played in the clubs, but I would still, I'm not a dancer, but if I was, I'd probably want to dance to the first one.
So we have 1968, 1988. Maybe in 2028, they should do another version of Hush.
You never know. On the Whoosh album, which they thought might be their last, which they thought the album before that might be their last. They actually did. They remade the song that I covered yesterday, "And the Address," which was the first song, and it was the last song on Whoosh. Then it wasn't the last song because they put a bonus track on the album, making it not the last song, which people were just in a big kerfuffle about. It's not the last song, and it's because everything's got to be such a big deal nowadays. But I thought they did a really good version, but it was a little bit like this, where it didn't have quite the same energy, had a more modern sound to it, which kind of took me out of it a little bit because I'm so used to what I'm hearing in the first version, and I've been listening to that version for 30 plus years. So it's hard to come in and say, we're going to do something that's going to knock your socks off just like that does. Pretty tough, especially the longer you go.
And a classic song too. So if you're going to like do another version of it, you almost have to like completely mix it up.
Yeah.
And this is going to be an out there example, but they're just fresh in mind because my wife got an album of theirs for Christmas. But Roxette had a very huge hit with a song called "It Must Have Been Love." Nice little 80s pop ballad, right, with a piano and everything. They did a version of that on an album called Tourism, where they turned it into like a country honky tonk type song.
Wow.
It just kind of redid, it's still the same melody, just with a country arrangement on it. And that's one way to go. Like, I'm glad they didn't just try and redo the first version. And they're only, 3 or 4 years apart, I think, those versions.
Wow.
If you're going to do Hush, instead of doing it part and parcel like you did in that one in 1968, do it as a spoken word William Shatner type LSD drop thingers. I don't know, just mix it up a little bit. Don't just we're going to play it mostly the same and just take out all the personality and just make it kind of more of a stock rock track.
I have to cringe at the term spoken word after the last And the Podcast Will Rock I was on when we listened to David Lee Roth's Christmas song. that was
blues. Yes.
Oh God, that was painful. No, I agree. What was their other hit? Was it The Look? Was that them?
Yeah, they did The Look.
That was a good tune.
Yeah, they got quite a few. Like they knew how to write a pop hook really well. But they're one of my wife's favorite bands. So for Christmas, I'm always looking for things for her. Like, she gets me vinyl, I'm going to get her vinyl. So we got some Roxette for Christmas this year.
Does she also do 9 podcasts?
No, she does not. She won't even come on one with me. So
that's not going to help her public podcast image at all.
She hears enough from me as it is. Just need to hear me in a podcast.
There you go. Well, Corey, I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking about Hush. And it's really, this song has quite a history with all the different people that have covered it, with people that have had hits. I mean, it was a semi-hit for Billy Joe Royal. I can't imagine the bank that Joe South made on this song, considering how many people covered it.
Oh God, I'm just going through the list here. Tommy Korberg, Millie Rush, Love Affair, Kula Shaker. Swiss Brand Goth Hard includes a cover of they also performed it live with John Lord.
Wow.
At the Zermalt Unplugged Festival in 2008. Partridge Family did a version with David Cassidy on vocals. Funky Junction, which is a band that features Phil Lynott, Eric Bell, and Brian Downey from Thin Lizzy. They did a version.
Interesting. Now, in the history of Deep Purple, I can't remember if it was after Machine Head, somewhere in there, Richie wanted to break off from Deep Purple and took Ian Pace, and they did a jam session with Phil in it before he really became the musician that he went on to become. And he was a little bit too green for what they wanted to do, but apparently they had a whole jam session that was taped. And if anyone ever recovers that tape, I think the whole world would love to hear what they had done on that day.
No kidding. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. And I've seen Thin Lizzy live. They tour with Uriah Heep a lot because they're managed by the same company. But I did not enjoy their show. I could not wait for them to get off the stage. And it might have just been the night. It might have been part my mood. Deep Purple was doing a double show that night. They were doing the entire Machine Head album plus their regular set. So I had a lot to look forward to, and I kind of just wanted to get to it. So it might have been part that. But I think there were another band like AC/DC where they were really repetitive. And I just was not into what they were doing.
And are they another one of those bands that has 0 original members right now?
I think so. Yeah, very possible. Maybe 1 or 2 at best. But that gets really tough because if you've been in the band, if you're part of the band, it seems like you should have the right to carry it on, whether there's original members or not. But there is that, argument about, well, if there's no original members, it's not the band anymore. And we get caught up in all this stuff that is just getting caught up in all this stuff. But it would be, it's like when I went and saw the Moody Blues at this big festival. It was the Moody Blues and Yes and Asia and the Emerson, Lake and Palmer Legacy Band with Arthur Brown singing. It was just an incredible night at the Hard Rock. But when I saw the Moody Blues, I was really looking forward to them, but they didn't do anything I knew. They didn't do Tuesday Afternoon. They didn't do I Know You're Out There Somewhere. Not one song that was a hit that I was familiar with, which I thought was really weird. I was more disappointed in that than who was in the band.
It'd be like if this version of Thin Lizzy came out and didn't do The Boys Are Back in Town or Whiskey in the Jar or something.
Right. Yeah. Or if AC/DC didn't do Dirty Deeds, it's just like, how does that not happen?
Foreigner's another one of those bands, no original members, but they still go out and do Cold as Ice and Jukebox Hero and Dirty White Boy and Feels Like the First Time.
I kind of feel like you have to. I mean, it's like Deep Purple not doing Highway Star or Smoke on the Water. I can't imagine, what the reviews would be the next day if they didn't play those songs.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Highway Star is their typical opener. And usually Hush or Black Knight is the closing song in the set. So really good stuff. But Corey, thank you so much. Everybody check out the Corey Morris podcast universe, his vast variety of shows. I have them all listed in the show notes for you because of course I do.
Yeah, cmpu.ca. You're going to be able to find them all there too. All the shows I've guested on, which includes quite a few of yours. All the shows that are currently out, a couple that are no longer in production, and a few that are coming down the pipeline in 2025.
I do miss doing our Aerosmith show. That was a lot of fun. I was really digging a lot of those tunes, but boy, it was so polarizing. Some of those songs were just painful, and other ones were like, I want to play the song again right after the show because it was that good.
Yeah, it was weird. I think we found a fan base more toxic than Van Halen fans. And that was Aerosmith fans.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty amazing considering how tumultuous their whole history has been. But the interesting thing about this show is that I know this entire catalog. I'm not as familiar with the newest album because I just haven't had a chance to listen to it back and forward that much to where I know the songs as well as I know all the other ones. But with Uriah Heep, there were albums I had never heard. With Aerosmith, there were albums I never heard. With this one, I know the catalog so well that it's really a different experience for me to do the show.
I tell you, sometimes though, Scott, late at night, I think, man, should we bring back Aerosmith show, and then I come to my senses and think, no, we should.
If we just didn't listen to what anyone had to say about what we were doing, it would probably be fine. But I will say the mixtape aspect of it was getting very challenging.
That was the part I struggled with too. The part I questioned when we started doing the show, when John came up with the concept was, eventually you could have 6 mixtapes and it won't be enough because it's such a volume of music, and you want to reward the great deep cut tracks and include them on something. But when you only got 9 spots on the side of a mixtape, there's not enough room.
I think honestly, the only way for us to actually do it would be to do it this way, to where we're not setting anything up for pass or fail. It's just, here's what we like, here's what doesn't strike us, and just do it like that. I think the aspect of the mixtape is fun, and it makes it for an interesting show that sets it apart a little bit. But I think there's just too many songs that would belong on that tape. You'd have to have like a 6-set album.
Yeah, no kidding. You're talking about, I could pick 100 songs easy, probably for
exactly.
So how many mixtapes would that be? That'd be like,
Exactly. And I think that, K-Tel would be like, we're not even touching that.
Yeah, that's way too much for a K-Tel compilation, and that's saying something.
Yeah, so I would definitely be open to doing it, but I think we'd have to really look at how we do it. I think if we did it like this, that would probably work, and just just talk about the song, and here's what we like, here's what we don't like, and don't worry about whether people are hating us doing it or not. Just do it because we enjoy doing it.
Here you go.
So if we want to take on another podcast at some point, we could always do it, and we have plenty of songs we never got to.
I got to wrap up 1 or 2 before I add any more. Holy cow.
Yeah, same here. Well, I'll be done with this one in about 16 months. So we've got time.
Well, let's reconvene in 16 months and see where we're at.
I'm in. Well, my friend, You have a great day. Everybody, check out the Corey Morrissette podcast universe, the cmpu.ca, links in the show notes. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Today is Today is Tuesday. Tomorrow's Haskin Cast. We'll see you back on Thursday for another episode of Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. Cheers. Thanks for listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast, a tour of the entire Deep Purple studio recordings. Please remember to give the show a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Leave a comment and tell your friends. I also have a Patreon set up if you'd like to support the show. You can also write to me at smokeonthepodcast@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and thanks for listening.